The 2025 golf season is heating up. We've got the players this week here. The first $1 million to first golf contest on DraftKings for the year. In this video, I'm going to be laying out a basic tutorial that you can follow to crush DFS golf with SaberSim this season. I'll walk through why sims are so valuable for daily fantasy golf, show you how to build lineups, add in your takes and research, and then get your lineups from SaberSim entered into your contests in just a couple clicks. My name is Jordan Chan. I'm SaberSim's head coach. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. Now, the first thing we want to do when we sit down to build in the SaberSim app is get our entries file uploaded, which means you do need to have contests reserved to play before you start building. I highly recommend reserving your entries for your contests ahead of time when you're building with SaberSim. It's going to make it extremely easy to get all of your lineups entered into the right contest with just a couple clicks. And it also will make sure if you're using SaberSim Ultimate and Contest Sims that you're able to configure those contest sims very easily. If you haven't pre-registered for contests before, I know that's new to some people. I'm going to drop a link in the description with a short 2-minute tutorial for both DraftKings and FanDuel on how to do that. I've already registered for my contests here, so let's get those uploaded. We'll start by heading over to the contest tab. And all I'm going to do is click the upload entries button here, download template file from DraftKings, which will download my entries file to my computer, and I can drag and drop that and pull in my contests here. This lets SaberSim know what we're playing. You'll see all of my contest sim settings have been configured, but also we've got this entries file now in our database, and it makes it very easy to get my lineups into these contests. Now that that's done, let's bounce back over to the build here, and we'll go ahead and get a build started in just a few seconds. But I do first just want to touch on why simulations are so valuable for DFS golf. Traditional optimizers are going to assume that players score their average projections 100% of the time. And that is very much not the case in a sport like golf. In fact, oftentimes, if you look at the distributions for players in our system here by clicking on a player name, you'll see that the average projection can actually be quite a rare outcome. It's a bit of a amalgamation, a mix of these two different distinct branches of the tree here. One where the golfer misses the cut and has a floor outcome, and then the ones where they're making the cut, and then of course the associated ceilings. When we look at a guy like Daniel Berger here, we see his average projection of 63 points is pretty rare here. He's got a unique distribution across the board here. And all of these golfers, depending on their Vegas odds, their overall skill level, the course history, are going to have these different unique distributions. Traditional optimizers are glorified calculators. So when you're building on a tool like that, you're trying to hack it in a way where you can come up with what the actual real ranges of outcomes for golfers look like. What is the downside potential? What are the most common outcomes? And what are the big ceiling outcomes that you actually need to take down tournaments? This is pretty hard to do. And even if you're using things like randomness settings or exposure settings, you're really losing a ton of nuance in terms of actually building the types of lineups it takes to win. On SaberSim, when you build lineups, we're actually starting with hole by hole simulations of the entire tournament. We run those simulations hundreds of thousands of times to come up with the real possible range of outcomes. And each lineup you build on SaberSim is actually the winning lineup for a given way that the tournament may play out. That doesn't mean any given lineup you build on SaberSim is the winning lineup for the way that the tournament will play out, but you know that these lineups have the upside it takes to win because there is a particular tournament script where that outcome does play out. You're getting lineups that make a lot more sense naturally right out of the gate. So because of that, for my initial builds, I'm typically touching nothing. I want to see what the Sims think about the slate, and I want to use that as a data point in my process. So for my first build, all I'm going to do is make the 2 player projections required here for DraftKings rules and just get a build started. And again, what's going to happen here is SaberSim is going to run these simulations, leverage these simulations in building out all of these lineups here. And each lineup that I get on the other side is a winning lineup for a given way that the tournament may go. Now that the lineups are built, the next thing I want to call out is how the lineups are sorted here. Just as average projections alone have issues when it comes to building lineups, they're also not the perfect tool for ranking your lineups. But most optimizers out there are always just going to sort your lineups top to bottom in highest projection to lowest. Now, there's two problems with that. Again, the first is that average projection does not always correlate with upside in a sport like golf. We saw that looking at the player distributions a moment ago, but also, of course, we need to account for ownership here. Fantasy points scored are less valuable to us the higher owned that player is, because it means more lineups in the contest are also still getting those fantasy points. I know I'm not reinventing the wheel here. You've probably heard of this before, but it's an important factor to take into account ownership in your lineups. So when you finish building lineups on SaberSim, your lineups are first going to be sorted by Saber score here. You see up here, golf main 10 to 50K. And if we take a closer look at our Saber scores, we can break down exactly what this metric is made up of here. We are still weighing in the player projections. It's still a useful factor for determining the lineup quality, but we're also factoring the 99th percentile in for players. What do they score when they are having a tournament winning type score? And then negatively weighing the ownership here. We want players that are projected well on average, have high upside, and come in at lower ownership. And that's how these lineups are sorted right off the bat. So you'll see these lineups look pretty good. We're getting some lower owned plays in each of them, sometimes jamming in some chalk like Scotty Scheffler here, but we're getting nice balanced lineups that have all of these factors you need to win. However, if you are on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, you can go one step further by running a contest sim, which is going to be the next step if you're on that plan. So I'm going to get these started here, and that's going to kick off our contest sims. And what this does in this case is it takes every single lineup in your pool here and simulates it in every contest we just uploaded in our entries file. So if we take a look over at these different contests that I'm playing here, you see I've got a mix of a ton of different contest types. I've got large field 150 maxes like the mini max. I've got single entry contests like the albatross. I've got contests as high as around $12 to enter and contests that are as low as the 10 cents entry fee. All of these contests have different dynamics. Your opponents are going to play different types of lineups in these contests. The payout structure in these contests is different. The overall size of how many lineups you're competing against is different. And that all shifts the optimal strategy of what it takes to win in each of these different contests. A contest sim goes straight to the source to figure out what is the most profitable way to play each of these different tournaments. It takes each lineup in your pool, enters it in a simulated version of every contest in your entries file, and simulates that contest out 100,000 times using our tournament simulations, the payout structure of the contest, and an expected field of what we think your opponents are going to do to figure out what lineups make the most money in those simulations. SaberScore is a great heuristic to get a sense of what the best lineups are in your contest, but if you're serious about maximizing your profit playing golf DFS this summer, I'd recommend checking out the SaberSim Ultimate plan and testing out the contest sims. Either way, now that our contest sims are complete here, we are sorting by the ROI, which means we're ready for the next step in the process. Now, before we do go much further here, I do like to use this part of the process as an opportunity to just get an initial entries file loaded into my contests. And whether you're using SaberScore or the contest sims to sort your lineups, I'll recommend my preferred way to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is click the autofill tab here and scroll this over. You can use the arrow keys. And then I recommend sorting by prize pool here and then filling using the unique rank fill method. And then all I'm going to do is click save to contests. Now, what this is doing in the case of contest sims, it is putting a unique lineup into every entry that I played, sorting by the ROI for that particular contest sim. So going down the list here, the birdie first is getting the 20 best lineups from my portfolio by the birdies contest sim ROI. Then it's not going to use those 20 in any other entry here. And the next contest up is the full round special here, which is going to get the next 18 best lineups sorted by the contest sim for that contest. So we're diversifying by playing a unique lineup into every single entry that we're playing, but we're also making sure that we're always playing the best possible lineup we can in each contest as we go down the list. And I sort by prize pool because I want to give a little bit of priority to the biggest contests, the contests that I care about the most, where I want to make sure that I've played the best possible lineup are the biggest contests with the biggest prizes here. So that's typically how I do that. Now, if you're instead sorting by SaberScore, you're going to be getting the best possible lineup by SaberScore in that case, using a unique lineup into each entry here. So either way, you're going to be diversifying by putting a unique lineup into each entry you're playing while prioritizing your most important contests to get the best lineups first. So now it's a good opportunity to take some time to review and revise your portfolio. Now, if you don't know very much about golf DFS or really just kind of want to take a trust the Sims based approach, you could honestly be done at this point. Entering the lineups that the Sims like here, and you'll probably be in a pretty good spot and grade out pretty well in our post contest Sims. But it's frankly a lot of fun to have some takes when it comes into golf DFS, and I like to at least spend some time reviewing my lineups and seeing if anything jumps out to me. So the way that I typically do that is jumping over to the left side of the screen here with the players table and scrolling this over a bit to the right. The three most important columns here are going to be your pool, your entry exposure, and your leverage. So let's talk about what each of these are here. Your pool is the percentage of lineups in your overall pool that have a particular player in it. Knowing that the lineups are being built from the tournament simulations, it is a rough approximation of how likely that player is to be in the winning lineup here. Your entry exposure is, of course, how much of that player you have in your entries file after we have done this save here. And your leverage is going to be your exposure to a player minus the ownership projection. So your leverage column is going to show you your biggest stands over and under the field here. So our biggest stands in this case right now are Rory, Michael Kim, Doug Gim. These are the guys that we have more exposure in our entries file than the field does based on the ownership projection. And we can look at our biggest fades here by looking at the negative leverage. So you can see our biggest fade at the moment is actually Scotty Scheffler coming in at projected at the moment a whopping 61% owned. We're still getting 38% in our entries file, but he is our biggest negative fade on the field right now. And frankly, that does make a little sense to me. I know it's Scotty Scheffler, but this is golf DFS here. It's having a player that is owned at 61% heading into virtually any tournament, much less a stacked pseudo major here, does seem a little insane to me. So I actually am kind of okay with that. But that brings me to the main point of looking at these columns here, especially the leverage column. This is a good way to get a sense of what stands the Sims are taking here. And you should be checking those stands with your overall takes on the slate. Maybe you look at this and run your build, and Rory, as being your second highest, almost the highest overall stand on the slate here, makes you a little scared, and you don't really want to play as much Rory. Well, what you should do in that case here is to start making adjustments to the exposures so that your leverage is more in line with how you view that player on the slate. Let's say you don't really have a strong opinion on Rory. You're kind of neutral on him, maybe a little bit surprised to see that he's coming in with such high exposure. Well, we can instead set a maximum exposure of, say, 18%, matching approximately the ownership projection, and then resave our contests. And we'll see that SaberSim is going to go through now, do this same saving approach, the same method here, and try to make sure that we're not getting any more than 18% Rory in any given contest. And once that process completes, now we'll see that we have a nice 16% exposure to Rory. He's slightly under the field here, so now we're a little bit more balanced. And you could continue to go down the list, either direction here, making changes until you're happy with your overall exposures. Maybe you come back to a guy like Scotty Scheffler and say, you know what? I don't care if he's 61% owned. He's Scotty Scheffler, and I want to make sure he's not the guy that buries me on this slate. Maybe we get to 60% minimum exposure in this case for a guy like Scotty Scheffler. Now that that's done, you can see our biggest fade is now Colin Morikawa. Both of these guys are some of the higher priced guys in the field, some of the higher projected guys in the field. The lineups that are now containing Scotty Scheffler had to come from somewhere, so it doesn't make sense now that we're having a bigger fade on a guy like Colin Morikawa. Now, you don't also just have to make adjustments that get you closer to the field. I think those are the safer types of adjustments to make, but you can also take more proactive stands here. Let's say that your research is taking you in the direction of wanting to get over the field on a guy like Hideki, who is projected to be 8% owned, one of the overall higher projected players in the field, but pretty expensive here, and just not a guy that we're getting a ton of exposure to. We're slightly over the field on him right now. We could also take a stand to make sure we're getting a lot of him in our lineups. And one of the ways I recommend doing that is using what the natural curve of your leverage looks like as a guidepost here. So as you're seeing, we are maximally over the field on any given golfer by about 10 to 15% here. Michael Kim coming in at 13%. That's about as high as SaberSim wants to get over the field on any particular golfer. And our biggest fades here are similar. We do have a little bit of a unique slate this week where we have a few of these guys that are going to be projected to be really highly owned, but we're coming in on our fades at, call it about 10 to 15% under the field on our top overall fades. So if you're trying to decide how much exposure should I get to Hideki, I really like him for this slate, I would use that leverage column, that leverage curve as a guidepost. Start by getting, depending on how much you like him on this slate, 10 to 15% over the field if that's your guy, if that's your favorite play. So let's assume we wanted to do this here. We want to see Hideki showing up as one of these top 3 leverage plays. What we'll do in that case is go back, let's sort by the projection column to find him again, and we're projecting him at 18% owned. So let's say that I want to get 20% of him here. So I'll set a minimum exposure to 20%. We'll go ahead and readjust our entries file here, and we'll see how this all shakes out. Okay, now that that's done, let's go ahead here and look at our leverage column again and see what our top plays are now. He is now our second highest exposed golfer on this slate. Still a little higher on Michael Kim. You could continue to inch this up a little bit higher if you really wanted to see him at the top of that list, but we haven't really disrupted the whole curve that we were seeing of the leverage column. We're not going way crazy on any given individual player. Now, you can, of course, play Golf DFS however you like. If you prefer to have a tighter player pool and have higher leverages, you can uncheck a bunch of players. You can lock certain players in if you want to do that. But I do recommend, especially if you're new to Golf DFS, to play a more diversified player pool. This is a very high variance sport, and it feels pretty bad to have your total weekend sunk because you went all in on a guy who just happened to miss the cut. And this really should be an iterative process. I recommend making a couple adjustments to exposures based on what you see in your initial review of your lineups, resaving your contests, and seeing how your new leverage column looks. Are you happy with the results there? Are there guys that came up or dropped down as a result of that? And tweaking with it until you finally dial in on the set of exposures and your portfolio that you really like for that slate. Now, if you make a bunch of exposure changes, or you make a few particularly large exposure changes, or make some changes that are really in opposition to what the Sims think, you may end up seeing a message at some point that says, we can't reach your exposures anymore. If you see that message, what we'll do is try our best to get as close as we can to the exposures that you've set, knowing that some of them we can't reach completely. But if you do see that message, what I recommend doing is clicking the rebuild lineups button here. This is going to trash everything we've done, but it's going to take the exposures you've set so far and rebuild a new pool using those as a baseline this time. It's almost like taking your progress, saving it, and starting fresh from that point with a fresh new build that will allow you to continue to iterate and adjust your exposures further. But once you're happy with what you're seeing in your leverage column and your exposures and your overall portfolio, we're ready to get these lineups entered into our contests and up into DraftKings or FanDuel or wherever you're playing. And this is really where it's valuable to have uploaded your entries file ahead of time, because all we have to do in this case is first check the settings menu in the upper right here and make sure all open DFS site on download is toggled on, and then click this download icon in the upper left. This is going to download the file to our computer with our entries file and take us to the right page on DraftKings to upload it. So all we have to do here now is upload CSV and go ahead and upload that file, and we are good to go. Now, I am recording this here on Tuesday afternoon. Golf really isn't a sport where the news is going to dramatically affect the projections or sims, so I think it's perfectly fine to be starting to build your lineups on around Tuesday afternoon, most of the time when our projections come out. I will typically end up doing a final build on Wednesday night, sometimes just to take a quick look if anything meaningful has changed, or maybe give a once over to my lineups one more time. The main thing you do potentially want to take a look at here is if there were any players that have withdrawn. So one very quick, easy way to do that is to just open up a fresh build here after you've gone through the process of saving and uploading your entries and sorting by the entry exposure column here, and just doing a quick glance to make sure nobody that you have exposure to is tagged with an out tag. If you do have a player that is out in your entries file, you'll also see this red lightning bolt. Well, it's not red right now. This gray lightning bolt turn red, which indicates that you have a player in your entries file that has been ruled out. In that case, you would want to come back and do another build and repeat this process over here and make sure that you're happy with your portfolio based on the new news. And that's it. That's a simplified process that you can use to enter high quality golf DFS lineups every week you play. We walked through why sims are so valuable and why traditional optimizers really struggle to build good golf DFS lineups. I showed how to get your entries file uploaded, build lineups, and then review and revise to fine tune and add your takes. We'll have more golf videos coming out as the summer continues to ramp up and we get into majors season, but I hope this was a helpful video to get you started for the players this week. If you're still itching for more content, you can check out this video next, which is a walkthrough of how I approached building lineups for the majors last season. And if you have any other questions, you can always reach out in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. In the meantime, good luck with the players this week, and I'll see you in the next one.